All right, I'm going to get started. A couple of points on Moodle. Your Unit 2 materials are up, and also I posted this picture that I'm going to be referring to. So remember this class, you know, if anybody ever asks, hopefully it's not as much as what it used to be when they first did the name change. Well, when you're home or you're talking to your friends or family and they say, well, what are you majoring in? And you say kinesiology, and they say, well, where I'm from, the usual response is, it was Dad. And so you probably would say, well, it's human movement studies. Right? And so my pregame speech here is that this class is the class that your major is founded upon. So, like, this is where this should be fun and exciting, and I know for you guys it is because it's Friday at 7:30 and you're here. But even if you're watching or rewatching, you know, maybe the test scores weren't as good as you were hoping. I think the class average, I think I sent it to you guys for 68, but I did a little research, and I saw that like my last 4 videos had like 40 views. And there's a class of 80 something people total. And that's skewed because my mom and dad watch my. Misha, I don't really watch it, but I want to give you the like or whatever. So my point is that maybe this could remotivate us, getting involved with the group chat, finding different ways to study. I can't tell you how to study, but I think we can agree that the stuff I told you was going to be on there was on there, right? Okay. So trust me when I say, guys, this is kind of tricky, but here's why it's tricky. You know, make a little star, make a little note, because I'm going to ask you that. All right. Enough of that. We're going to get into, I think it is fun stuff. We're going to start our more in-depth lectures on the different joints and articulations with the ankle and subtalar joints. I try because these are 2 separate articulation guys, first and foremost. The ankle, and I'm going to do a little structural explanation here because I think it's important for us to understand why structures are here and what we use them for outside of this motion. But our ankle and subtalar joint is similar, not the same, but to a skateboard. So you think about how a skateboard works, and it has 2, we used to just think of the wheels, but there's another mechanism on there to help our balance, and that's the wobble. You know, a skateboard can kind of wobble, you know, change your direction and to help you balance. So you have wheels and wobble. Now the wheels can continue spinning forever. It doesn't have to go back and forth. You don't have to go backwards on a skateboard. Our wheels are our ankle joints. The true ankle joint, where the talus, that's this dorsal bone, articulates with the distal fibula and tibia, creating like a socket. You call it an ankle mortise, but that's like the wheel. Okay. For us, obviously, our wheel can't just continue to spin. So what we have to do, we have to rotate our wheel until we run out of wheel motion. Then we have to lift our wheel up and reposition it to wheel again. And it's really kind of cool. Do that ipsilaterally. We'll take our right wheel and we'll roll. And then our left wheel will roll and we'll lift it up and reposition it. And roll. Okay. And so the wheel itself is of very high importance to not only our movement, but to protect from getting injured. Because if we have damage to our wheel, it's kind of hard to get away from danger. Now I get on the phone and I say, ambulance, come and get me. But our ancestors, if you had a problem to your wheel, it's a bad day. Okay. So what I want to first emphasize that our wheel is not the same as the wobble, the side to side, the balance. So here's our wheel. I use this one because the little spring is broken. But imagine if the same articulation, the same joint that the wheel is on did the wobble. Like, that's not a good thing, right? Like, we don't want this motion to happen inside of the ankle. We want the ankle to do this, and we want other things below the ankle to wobble, to balance. And those other things, we call that the subtalar and transverse dorsal joints. It's basically all the bones underneath the talus, underneath the ankle. How many of you guys have ever heard, I'm sure it's all of you, but you don't want to assume, how many of you have ever heard of a high ankle sprain? There's nothing high about it. That's an ankle sprain. Like, that's an actual sprain to your wheel. There's nothing high about it. A low ankle sprain is a sprain to your wobble, to the tarsal bones that shift and glide underneath. We just call it ankle because our whole lives we've been called it ankle. You know, move your ankle, sprain your ankle, ankle. But we need to know those are two separate articulations, two separate joints, and how the body moves. Now, they live in the same apartment complex. Some of mine, how I did this cheesy, but they're mine. So what I mean by that is synovial joints. Just like you got to put oil in a car to keep the moving parts from, you want to reduce friction, right? You put oil in your car so that the moving parts don't heat up as much. It's very similar. You have moving parts in here. You have moving pieces. And so our bodies, for all of these different synovial joints, synovial fluid, that's our oil. And these articulations are encapsulated by like water balloon type structure. We call that the capsule. And what ligaments are just thickened parts of the overall water balloon. They're areas of the water balloon that over time our bodies say, we get a lot of stresses here. I may want to make this part of the water balloon thicker to help prevent the bones from hypermobility. So what I'm saying is I can see how it's confusing because you have the ankle and the subtalar and transverse dorsal joints in the same apartment complex, right? In the same capsule, in the same water balloon, but they're not in the same apartment. The ankle is on the top floor and the subtalar and transverse dorsal is on the bottom floor. And we're going to talk about those motions today. We're going to get into inversion and eversion and pronation and supination. But the main thing is that those are not happening in the same place. Okay. Think of it like this: if you had a intersection, so let's say Johnson and Cajun Dome, you can have like an intersection of roads. I think this way goes straight into a little community. You can literally be in the same place, like right in the middle, and be in between two different roads. Think of the ankle and subtalar joint not as an intersection, but think of it as an overpass, where you have, if you were looking at an overpass from the top, you may think they intersect in the same point, but one road goes on top of the other. Does that make sense? So it's very similar. The ankle joint is a uniaxial hinge. So if you look at our joint classifications, right, we have diarthrosis, uni, bi, and multi, tri. So it's a uniaxial. And then you look at the structural glidings. I'm going to explain what gliding is with the subtalar, but hinge. So the ankle is just as much a hinge as the elbow, just as much as a hinge as the door. In fact, we can see where its bilateral axis is. You have your malleoli. You guys remember that from anatomy lab, right? The malleoli are just areas of your fibula and your tibia. Just as a reminder, we have all these different bone structures of bones, but that's like saying Acadiana is an area of Louisiana, but it's not its own state, right? It's just an area. So our lateral malleolus, malleoli, our medial malleoli are not separate bones. They're just certain areas of one bone. Okay. So where the talus articulates with the tibia and the fibula forms a joint, a uniaxial hinge that can move in its sagittal plane. So first of all, uniaxial moves about one axis, one plane, so we got to count the two motions. So bilateral axis, sagittal plane, and bilateral axis should make sense because this is the outside of my ankle, the inside of my ankle, side to side. And so we have to account for motion in one plane, so we have to have two different motions. Your body, we had this conversation a couple weeks ago, it was a brilliant question. The reason your ankle doesn't have traditional flexion extension, and that's because you can get into fetal position two different ways for your ankle. There's no rule that says they all have to be the same. And one of the things that makes us unique is that our ankles can wheel and wobble while our upper extremity can do pretty cool things. It makes us pretty unique as a species. So the two different ways you can get into fetal position is weight bearing, or we call that closed chain. Closed chain is just basically your distal segment is fixed on the ground and you're moving things on the fixed segment, usually hands and feet. So in other words, if I was going to get into a ball while standing, it's a fancy way of saying if I was going to get into a ball by standing, I would have this type of flexion of my ankle joints. And we call that type of flexion dorsum or dorsiflexion. So you think about the dorsal fin, dorsum on the top, right, top side. So getting into a ball, closed chain, or with your feet on the ground, you'll have a dorsi type of flexion. Illusions. Well, if dorsum flexion or dorsiflexion is getting into a ball like this, well, wouldn't the same change in angle or articulation getting me into a ball moving the distal by the proximal be like this? The camera couldn't see what I was doing. My fault. Wouldn't this be the exact same as this? The top part of my foot gets closer to the front part of my shin, whether it's literally moving the top part of my foot closer to the shin or moving the shin closer to the top part of my foot. It's the same relative change, right? And once again, the reason Campbell doesn't do angles, even though there are angles, it's hard to remember which one we're talking about. Because as I decrease one, I increase the other side. And so when we're looking at especially things that are 90 degrees, if I shorten this one, I lengthen that one. If I ink it. So I'm trying to teach you practically what it's about. If I shorten this one, I lengthen this one. And if I shorten that one, I lengthen this one. It gets confusing. Okay. So dorsum flexion, dorsiflexion. And then the opposite of that is getting into a ball when you are open chain or off of the ground. And we call that plantar flexion. So in other words, if you were in fetal position, I mean, you don't have to answer this, but I just find it fascinating. Some people, when they sleep, like they wake up in the same position they went to bed. Fascinating, more power to you. That's not me. I'm all over the place. And so if you were going to wake up, some people wake up in a shortened fetal position. And so if you were going to get into fetal with your feet off of the ground, you probably wouldn't be dorsi, you'd probably be plantar. Or if you were going to do, I think in your PowerPoint, I have a picture of like gymnast or a diver getting into a tuck position, you'd probably be plantar flexed, get into a ball with your feet off. Does that make sense? So plantar and dorsiflexion. And we base your position off of anatomical. So in anatomical position, we are neither, because we can go in both directions. So it would be something like this. If I was on the ground, see if I can show this. So anatomical position, I can have plantar from, I could have dorsi to, I could have dorsi from, I can have plantar to, and remember to and from is anatomical. I could be off the ground, I could say plantar from, dorsi to, dorsi from, plantar to, plantar from. I don't have normal ankle motion, pretty tight, so I can't do a full range of motion. But in your units, I tell you the degrees. Like you can have this many degrees from and this many degrees to. And then your total range of motion is how far east can you go plus how far west can you go. That's your total road. Okay. So think of it like this. Think of it. Let's use some practical things that we have kind of in our brains. Has anybody ever had a ankle sprain, like a low ankle sprain? And one of the things you notice is that the side to side hurts or it's discomforting, but going straight, you can handle going straight. In other words, going forward and back doesn't hurt as much or as uncomfortable as going side to side. And that's because you haven't done damage to the wheel. You've done damage to the wobble. And it's the wobble that's going to be the side to side. Make sense? I used to make my students learn all the stuff I used to, but you'll get that in grad school. So like a uniaxial, they call it, it's called the talifloral joint for the ankle, syndesmotic sprains and all kinds of stuff like that. We're just going to keep it simple, guys. It's the wheel. It's the wheel on your skate. Okay. On the test, and ladies back me up on this, the way I'm going to ask you questions, it's not meant to be tricky. It's meant to check your understanding on what I'm trying to teach you. So what I mean by that is, if I say, hey guys, how many different joint motions can the right ankle do? Literally all I'm doing is assessing to see if you remember that the ankle is a separate joint than the subtalar. I'm about to lecture on the subtalar. And that it has two motions. But your life data, the stuff you've been hearing as a kid, the stuff you've been hearing in college, the stuff you've been hearing by coaches, the stuff you've been hearing, and it's definitely the reason I'm teaching you this is because it's the truth. I don't mean for you to go back and be like, Coach, you said that was my ankle, and it's not like, I don't care. Yeah, I don't mean for you to be working in the clinic and be, well, Miss Johnson, actually, they don't let that matter. It matters to us because we have to know where these things are taking place, right? Okay. So when you have an ankle sprain, let's use some practicality here. Usually the mechanism of a high ankle sprain is the talus is only meant to travel in the sagittal plane of its socket. But as we know, sometimes we have twisting, we have torsion happening at the foot. And so that talus could literally, like imagine it twisting in the transverse plane, but those bones don't want it to twist in the transverse plane. So if you have too much force, like if someone lands on your foot, that talus may literally bow out the distal fibula and tibia. And that's where the syndesmotic, you might have heard that word before, syndesmotic sprain. But that's what happens. You get, it's like when you're eating chicken wings and you get the wing that nobody wants. I don't mind it, but not the drumstick one. You gotta tear it apart to get the meat. Drumstick. And so that makes sense why high ankle sprains take so long to heal. Because every time you weight bear, literally the tibia and fibula is getting bowed out. And it takes time for your body to heal it. So ankle motion, dorsi and plantar flexion, two different forms of flexion. Be aware of questions where I ask you, things like flexion and extension of the That's just me seeing if you remembered what I tried to teach you. Okay. All right, let's get to the subtalar. So the subtalar and transverse dorsal joints, what we call gliding joints. So for those of you watching from home, this is on Moodle. So unit 1, and then I posted the classification joint. So gliding joints are, I think in class I used the domino analogy, where like you can take dominoes and if you're trying to stack them up to knock them over, you can't rotate one domino 90 degrees and have the dominoes turn. You got to gradually, a little bit here, and then the next domino a little bit, then the next one a little bit. The sum total of a bunch of little bits gives you a lot. Let's see a better way to put it. Not a better way, maybe a different way. Change in your pocket is insignificant, meaning I probably don't have enough to buy me anything with just some pocket change. But the sum total of a couple months of pocket change can buy me something. Does that make sense? So it's very similar. Any one articulation about any other dorsal bone is insignificant. It's there. It's more movable than none. But one slight movement about one dorsal bone to the other is like pocket change. But the sum total of all of those pocket changes can create significant motion. One of the reasons we have these short bones, or tarsals we call short bones, is to summate movement, but also to dissipate force. There's great forces that we get back from the ground reaction forces. And it would make sense if this was one solid bone, like if our foot was one solid bone, we would have stress fractures all throughout that one rigid link, because the sum total of all the ground pushing back on us. So the way I like to look at it is our dorsal bones are the end result of all those stress fractures that have naturally kind of occurred, so that we could dissipate force, we could shift. Another practical way to look at it is if I'm going to jump off of a one-story building, I want to land in sand, not on cement, because the sand can shift and glide. And it's very similar. When we're jogging, walking, these dorsal bones can shift and glide and help dissipate force. There's other ways we dissipate force. Our arches help to dissipate force as well. But the point is that underneath the talus, so here's your talus. What's a submarine underneath the water? So here's the talus, and underneath the talus you have your calcaneus, and you have cuboid, and you have your naviculars, right? Cuneiforms, and all of those dorsal bones underneath the talus. Because remember, the talus is kind of locked in to the socket up here in the hinge. But underneath the talus, subtalar and transverse dorsal joints, those things can shift and glide and summate motion. Okay. So most of that motion, mostly, is in our frontal plane. Mostly. The reason I say mostly is because gliding joints are a little weird. When you're changing dominoes, all of that motion doesn't take place about one axis. It's a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here. It's not all happening in one place, like an elbow or a knee or knee. So people a lot smarter than me say, well, because it's the sum total of a bunch of small amphiarthritic articulations, and it's not all occurring about one place, we're not going to call it an axial joint, kind of like by default. So when I say it's mostly frontal, it's mostly frontal. But if you think about it, as you move your foot in and out, it kind of goes more and more and more frontal as you kind of roll it in. Like in other words, it's not all perfectly like a wobble, like a seesaw. Mostly frontal. I'm not going to ask that question on the test, but I just want, practically speaking, it's a logical. So what does inversion and eversion happen in our frontal, sagittal, transverse? Mostly frontal, because it's a gliding. It's the sum total of a little bit. The two motions that I'm going to hold you accountable for, and then we'll talk about pronation and supination, is inversion and eversion. Inversion and eversion. I apologize, I'm struggling with a little cold. Got the sniffles. Anybody else got the sniffles? How many of you remember Finding Nemo? Remember Nemo? So remember at the end of Nemo when all the fish had to get on the same page and swim down? Right? Go there. So they're all doing the same thing. Inversion and eversion is like the extremes, where what would happen if all of the different subtalar and transverse dorsal joints all glided the same way? And what would happen if they all glided the other way? Okay. So instead of going into angles, I'm going to teach it to you practically and what I think is functionally. Inversion is when medial gets closer to medial. Bottom line. When the fish swim and medial side of your foot gets closer to the medial part of your shin or your lower leg. Medial gets closer to medial. To make sense, some of you might have heard when we get into the hip, lateral rotation, medial rotation. And also you might have heard internal, external rotation. Those are synonymous. External and lateral is the same as medial and internal. So it's very similar, where medial, getting close to medial, kind of brings things in, relatively speaking. And lateral, getting closer to lateral, brings things out, external, relatively speaking. Now, this motion isn't very applicable, like just doing this, but it's very applicable when our feet are on the ground, because what it allows us to do is maintain the surface area at the bottom of our foot with the ground, even though our bodies may be doing different things. If I do something like this, I need my subtalar and transverse dorsal joints to glide. I need inversion so that I can keep my foot flat on the ground, have optimal interlock with my foot on the ground. So when you're going kind of side to side, back and forth, that's your subtalar just wobbling. It's just that instead of looking like this, it's the top part kind of wobbling bottom. It's that illusion you're talking. Okay. So think of it like this. Right subtalar and transverse dorsal joints inversion. Right subtalar and transverse dorsal joints inversion. And if I were going to freeze this, like Despicable Me, goggles, freeze rack. It's the same position. Makes sense? Okay. Again, I'm giving you the extremes, like what would it look like if all of them glided the same way? There's going to be some nuance you guys are going to learn in grad school. There's no rule that says all those dorsal bones have to glide the same way. And that's where we get into pronations and supinations and some rear version and anterior. In other words, there's some articulations within the torsals that can go in different ways to help us balance or to help shift weight or to help our arches. But for our class, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to look at how do all of the bones shift and glide one way, because there's significant motion there. We call that inversion. And how would they go the other way, eversion. Now, this is your first introduction into what I call a mirror effect. I don't know if that worked for you guys when I taught the mirror effect. Sagittal plane. Let me see how I can try to explain this. Let's say this was a mirror, and I'm up against the mirror, and I flexed my left arm. The mirror is going to make it look like I flexed my right arm. The mirror effect. I'm going somewhere with this. I'm just going to see if you understand what I'm saying. So in other words, it makes it look like what I do here, the mirror is going to do there. In other words, they're doing the same thing. Hey, right arm, do the same thing as my left. I would see this. Now, what would happen if I took my left arm in the mirror and went out? Well, my reflection, the other side would do this. It wouldn't come with me. That would be a possessed mirror. Do we agree? Okay. So what the mirror effect is if I have a right subtalar and transverse dorsal joints and a left, and I bring the medial closer to the medial, the same motion on my other side is going to have a mirror effect. This is the same motion. This is the same motion, not this. That's a global view. That's like windshield wipers. That's important. Because I think, and just going over tests with students over the years, some students feel that, well, how is this not the same motion? Because they're looking at it globally. How is this not the same motion? They're looking at it globally. They're not looking at it as a mirror effect relative to each side. Okay? So be wary. That's your first introduction. That didn't really matter in sagittal. But now that we're in frontal and it's going to play in transverse, that mirror effect is there. Okay. All right. So key points for today, and then we're going to do some practice, is that the ankle is a uniaxial hinge. The ankle itself supplies us with plantar and dorsiflexion, two different forms of flexion. But the ankle joint itself does not supply us with wobble, nor should it. Because again, if we ask the ankle joint to move in the frontal plane, that would be a bad day. And that's scientifically, that's what we call dislocations, bad day. We don't want the talus to move frontally much. We also don't want the talus to move transversely. I can literally feel the fibula being pulled apart from the tibia. We want the talus to go sagittal. We don't want frontal, and we don't want transverse. We want sagittal. The way we get our balance and our shift are the articulations underneath the subtalar. So the talus articulating with the calcaneus, and then you have the other short dorsal bones, cuboid, navicular, cuneiforms. And all of those little short bones can shift and glide on each other. When they all shift and glide in the same direction, they're either going medial to medial, we call that inversion, lateral to lateral, we call that eversion. And then again, the mirror effect. If I have bilateral subtalar joint inversion, it's going to look like this. It's going to be different rotations globally, but the same rotation locally. That's why we emphasize global and local references. Does that make sense? Somebody's going to fall for this trap, and I'm telling you, I'm going to ask this. I'm going to say, hey guys, was that the same motion or different motion? And someone's going to tell me this was the same motion, because in their mind, it's like, well, they were swinging the same way. Can you see that? Someone's going to tell me this was the same motion, because your brains want to see everything globally. But let's look at it how I taught you. I go from lateral, being closer to lateral, to medial being closer to medial. That has to be inversion. I go from medial being closer to medial to lateral being closer to lateral. That has to be eversion. They can't be the same motions because I didn't have the same practical changes in position. That's why position is so important. I am everted, now I am inverted. I had to have inversion. I'm inverted, now I'm everted. I had to have. Make sense? Okay, I'd like to try something different today, and feedback is always welcome. I would love for us, Emma and Grace, if you guys can walk around with me, we have 15 minutes. I would love for us to practically move these motions, live these motions. Do it open chain. Okay, this would be left ankle dorsi, left ankle plantar. Closed chain, this would be left ankle dorsi from, left ankle plantar to, right? Let's go and feel these movements, and we'll float around and answer any questions and clarify. Okay, cool. On two, ready? Great. You are now free to move about the country. You can also try the skateboard if you sign the waiver. Plantar and dorsi open chain. Let's see what that would look like. Let's practice identifying and communicating to and from anatomy. Great question. Yes, your logic is sound. So your position for your ankle, relative to anatomical, you can be dorsiflexed, or you could be plantar flexed, or you could be in anatomical position. So absolutely, and that's how you. And again, validate or disagree. That's okay. I think one of the hardest ones to see is like the squat, because you have this transition of my entire foot is on the ground. So dorsi from and plantar to is okay, but if I continue the plantar flexion from, only my toes stay on the ground. That's kind of weird. Because like that's kind of high. Well, is it open? Is it closed? Because my whole foot's not on the ground. So we need to practice that as well, right? Plantar from would look like this if my toes stayed on the ground. Wheel back.
And that would still be close.
Yeah, that's graduate school conversation. Okay, it's one of those like is warm water cold or hot? There's elements of both. So my job is just to make sure you know that this is plantar and this is dorsi, and then we can talk about semantics of those. Bless you. It's a really good question. All right, guys, let's keep practicing. I think this is where the A's and the B's are made, right here, or C's. I don't care. I want you to make what you want to make. I made shit. This was the first day of the major college. After you do the right, do the left, do both. Practice your verbiage or quiz each other. You come up with one and you practice. Left ankle this, right ankle that, bilateral ankle this, left subtalar this, right. This is verbiage, and we're going to float around in case there's questions about verbiage. Also, a great way to practice. Go to Google. Type in equal exercise and sort of or there and size the first way to learn which practice.
Yeah, so that's what yeah, so let's see.
Yeah, that's not.
So that's what.
And see like how foot and hand that's so they that so where is the system thing? So I'm talking to myself back there. So you guys do what we're doing, practice different motions, foot off the ground, foot on the ground. And any, just like the people that are here in person, any clarifications, 24-hour office hours. If I'm weak, I want to answer questions so that you can progress studying. So, so that's where we're just practicing some different stuff and sub-tailoring angle. And if you have any questions or clarifications, it. Hi, Mom.